Welcome to the third part of the course, and in fact this will be really the second half of the course. What we've done so far is to talk about the legal infrastructure that guides international business. And then we talked about the domestic law that may apply even when international law is the norm of the law to be applied. And here, I'm going to start all over. Sorry. Let me start over. Welcome back. Today we really start the second half of the course, and you might think it's probably the most important half of the course. What we've done so far is we've talked about international law and the legal framework that supports international law, the international law that's going to guide companies doing business. And then we talked about domestic law, and we mentioned how international law could be applied differently depending on which domestic court system it was being applied in. Today we start with the international sale of goods. For most of you, this is where you're going to come into contact with international law, and you'll do it on a routine basis because international law is what guides the sale of goods between people who live in different countries. It's international law that applies. It's the U.S. law, but it's really international law for the reasons we'll explain. Now we start this, however, with a very broad notion of looking at expectations and risks in the international sale of goods. Have you ever bought anything online? Maybe from eBay or maybe from Etsy, something not your typical Amazon relationship. Instead, it's a relationship where you don't really know the other party. Yeah, you can look at their ratings and their guidelines, but you don't have any prior course of dealing, and in fact, you may not trust one another. Well, this is very common in international sale of goods. Now, when you decided to purchase that good online, there was associated with that purchase certain risks. There were risks associated with that sales transaction the same way they're associated with any sales transaction. Essentially, problems with performance. Is the other party going to send you the goods? Say you bought an iPhone on eBay from some anonymous corporation. Are you going to get the goods or not? Are those going to come in or not? Will you get them on time or will they be late? Will there be something that happens to the goods, and what happens to those goods if something happens in transit? What happens if that iPhone is damaged in transit? Who gets to pay for that? Who's going to be responsible for that? When are you going to ship or pay for the iPhone? Do you pay for that before shipment or after shipment or after receipt? There's a lot of risks associated with any sales transaction. And of course, in the international context, those risks are magnified because now we're talking about distances, long distances. And we'll do a separate lecture talking about certain risks that are common to every international transaction. But what we're doing in this part of the course is we're going to look at how can we identify and manage potential legal risks. And we're going to do that through the use of a contract. So in this lecture, we're going to examine the risks that are present in an international sales transaction. And the flip side of risk, of course, is expectation. When you purchase that iPhone, you have an expectation. You have an expectation that you're going to get the good that you thought you were going to get, that good will work, and you're going to have an expectation of if it doesn't work, you get your money back. So there are a number of expectations in any sales transaction, and again, those are common in terms of international sales transactions. So let's talk about those expectations first, expectations of the parties in a sales transaction. Now, in any sales transaction, there's always going to be two parties. There's going to be the buyer and the seller. And we'll be using those terms a lot in the second half of the course, the buyer and the seller. And each of those parties has certain expectations when they enter into the sales agreement. Now, if you're a buyer, of course, your number one concern is you want to get the goods. The buyer wants to receive the goods, and not only receive the goods, but receive the goods that she bargained for. Meaning, if you ordered an iPhone with 128 gig memory, and you receive one with 64 gigabytes of memory, well, that's not the same good that you bargained for. You would not have paid the amount you paid had you believed that you would not get the good that you actually expected to get. So the buyer wants to receive the goods that she bargained for. Furthermore, the buyer ideally wants to confirm that the goods are satisfactory before payment. And we call this a right to inspect. You want to have, ideally, you want to get the iPhone, take it out of the box, look at it, make sure it works, take it to a professional if necessary to make sure that it's in good shape. But you want to examine the goods. You want to inspect the goods prior to paying for them. Because you don't want to pay for the goods until you finish the inspection. Ideally, this is what every buyer wants. And this is for a transaction that could be as simple as buying a bag of chips at the convenience store, or as complicated as buying $1 million worth of electronics from China. So every buyer has those same expectations. They share those expectations. Because otherwise, a buyer doesn't want to pay for goods that are not the goods that were ordered, and for which she may not have a use. Now, the seller has expectations as well. The seller wants to be paid. The seller's number one expectation is that it will receive payment. It will receive payment in the amount that was bargained for. And not only does a seller want payment, but a seller wants payment as quickly as possible, as expeditiously as possible. The seller wants to get paid. So the seller wants payment and wants payment quickly. Payment in the amount that was bargained for and quickly. Ideally, the seller doesn't want to ship the goods until he gets paid. Why? Because the seller wants to avoid shipping goods that may be rejected at the other end. Once the goods have left your place of business, then you're going to have to get those goods back. If you don't get paid, there's going to be a cost involved in retrieving those goods. And so, ideally, you get paid before the goods leave your warehouse. Because you may have parted with the goods, but you didn't receive payment, and now you've got the difficulty of recovering those goods.